In this lecture, we're going to talk about Chapter 16, Changes and Claims. So basically, what we need to talk about is what constitutes a change on a project, and what we're going to do throughout this lecture is define essentially what the difference between a claim and a change order is. In fact, we often mislabel those when we're out working in the industry. Some of you maybe have heard someone when something differs than what is expected on a project, that someone might make the statement like, oh, this is a change order. Well, what we're going to learn today is that's not, in fact, a change order. That's actually a claim to be made that ultimately we hope becomes a change order. So first off, we need to talk a little bit about contracts. We can't talk about making change orders or implementing change orders without understanding what the contract is. Now, if you recall from one of our last discussions, we talked about several things within contracts, and we talked specifically about the idea of both a minor and a material breach. So as contracts are written, if the way they're written is very narrow or very rigid, then it leaves the contracting parties with very little maneuverability. If it is a narrowly written contract, then potentially you have to perform per exact print of that contract, and any deviation from that could constitute either a minor or a material breach of contract. So it's very important when we start looking at contracts that there is some type of provision that's within that contract that will allow us to make a change to that contract without actually breaching the contract, because with that breach of contract, then you have the potential outcome of one of the parties being able to abandon that contract. So we don't want to do that. So we're going to look really quickly at a couple of some of the verbiage and some of the articles in both the A201 and the A401. So starting off with the A201, in Article 7, Changes in the Work, paragraph 7.1.1 strictly states that changes in the work may be accomplished after execution of the contract. Okay, so that's very important verbiage of the contract right there, and without invalidating the contract. Okay, this can be done by change order, construction change directive, or order of minor change in the work. And then we could go on and look at some of those limitations later. We'll not. Okay, so that's how the article or the verbiage written and how it deals with our prime contract. Remember, our A201 is the general conditions of the prime contract that would exist between us as the general contractor and the owner of the project. So the next thing we want to look at is in the AIA A401. So if you remember, this is the agreement that exists between the general contractor and the subcontractor. So just like we did in the prime contract, in our subcontract, we also need to have a provision. So the provision in the subcontract comes out of Article 5, paragraph 5.2. The subcontractor may be ordered in writing by the contractor without invalidating this subcontract to make changes in the work within the general scope of this subcontract, consisting of additions, deletions, or other revisions, including those required by modifications to the prime contract issued. I'm going to stop right there. I wanted to read that far because it's also very important to keep good cohesion between the subcontract and the prime contract, that we do have some type of reference or follow-through clause that would tie these changes to the prime contract. So those are the two articles in the two different contracts that allow us to actually make changes to the contract without invalidating those contracts. Okay, important. Change orders and claims are not the same thing. So by definition, a claim, and this is in the context of scope of work being changed on a project, or price, or the contract time. In that context, the claim is going to be referred to as an unresolved change request. So this actually, I believe, came out of the textbook. I would probably restate that a little bit. I would probably get rid of the word request and just say it's an unresolved change. Now, it could be a change request, but sometimes and we'll come back to this in just a little bit, sometimes we're out on the job, and as a general contractor, we run into issues that we don't believe are part of the original scope of work, but the physical nature of the work, it has to exist for the project to proceed forward, so we don't actually have a choice. So we're not really dealing with a request in that context. We're just looking at a change that we believe is not part of the original scope of work, and because of that, we're going to potentially at some point make a claim on that. We'll come back to that in just a few minutes. Okay, so let's talk about change orders then. A change order then, and we've talked a little bit about this semester, a change order is not a claim in the sense that we just referred to and what I kind of argued in my opening statement. A change order, by definition, is the instrument. It's the physical item that changes the scope of work, price, or time within a contract. So this comes out of Article 15, which deals with claims in the A201, and this is the 2017 version. So a claim is a demand or assertion by one of the parties seeking, as a matter of right, payment of money, a change in contract time, or other relief with respect to the items of the contract. So when I dissect that, basically what we are saying here is that I have a right to make a claim based on change of scope that might result in additional monies or additional contract time. Now, I probably ought to just really quickly make a statement here. Sometimes what we do on a project might actually decrease the dollars that it costs us to provide that. So it could actually work both ways in that regard. Okay, so let's move on here. Okay, so change orders. Again, this is out of the 2017 A201, paragraph 7.2.1, and then subparts 1, 2, and 3. A change order is a written instrument prepared by the architect and signed by the owner, contractor, and architect, stating their agreement upon all of the following. Now, really quickly, the way that reads, and this is the exact definition of change orders out of the IAA 201. So if you have signed or your company has executed a contract with the owner with the AIA, this is the definition. It doesn't matter what other definition of change order you've ever been given. This is the definition of a change order. So as we've talked before, and I'll state it again, your change orders, your contracts, let's start with contracts. In your contracts, it has a bunch of terms and conditions, but the three main things we often focus on is the scope of work, we focus on what the contract sum is, and we focus on what the contract time is. So when we're dealing with change orders, what we're really dealing with is a change in the scope of work, a change in the contract sum, or a change in the time. Now, I also should just really quickly mention here that it doesn't have to be all of these. It can be one, or it can be any combination of these three. So there is such thing as a change order that could change the scope of work, but it actually does not change the contract time or the contract sum. You could have a change of scope and work. For example, let's just say on one change order that we have some type of an electrical change where we're going to change a type of light fixture, and we are going to add in a different type of light fixture. That technically changes the scope of work, but just suppose in that example that the first light fixture that you're deducting or deleting out of the contract, let's just say that was a $10,000 item. And then when we go and we respec the new light fixture, let's just say that that was also $10,000. And so we're deducting $10,000, we're adding $10,000, but we're changing scope potentially. Now, some may argue that that's might be a little bit ridiculous because, you know, a light fixture is a light fixture, but let's maybe use another example where we're saying, okay, we're going to change the plumbing in a bathroom and we're going to decrease the contract amount by $10,000. And we're going to add a bunch of electrical on this project, and it's going to add $10,000 to the project. Okay, and if we were to submit both of those changes in one change order as an instrument, then obviously that would have to be documented because we're changing the scope for potentially two different trades as we're looking at the project. Okay, so this is another very important thing that you have to remember. And again, going back to some of the lectures that we've had, is you remember the general contractor, we're kind of in that unique position where we go in there and we go into contract. We have this prime contract with an owner. And with that prime contract, we have the complete scope of work. We contract with the owner to deliver per the plans and specifications this project, and we're going to do it for this sum of money. And then what we do as a general contractor, we turn around and we take that full scope of work and we basically fragment it. We divide it up and we start basically subcontracting that out to subcontractors and suppliers. And again, as we develop these subcontracts that go to our subcontractors and these material contracts that go to our suppliers, the sum of all those subcontracts and suppliers, material contracts, they should equal what the total scope of work is, plus whatever self-performed work we're going to be performing as a general contractor. What this means for us is if we have a change order, excuse me, if we have a change order that we have with the owner, that is one document, one change order that typically is generated or prepared by the architect and then sent to us, signed by the architect and the owner, and then we sign that. And then what we have to do is we have to take that change order that changed the prime contract and we have to look at it, because that one change order that changed the prime contract can have cause and effects with many other subcontracts that we have on the project. So you could take one, for example, change order to a prime contract, and as we start looking through and seeing how that change order to the prime contract would affect our subcontracts, we could have one change order to the prime contract that could make 5, 10, 15 modifications to subcontractors, which means for us, we're going to have to go back and generate up to, you know, my example, 5 to 15 subcontract changes to our subcontractors. I mean, in other words, we got to generate 15 subcontract change orders, okay, or however many that's going to affect us from that prime contract. So we will get into this starting next week, but the way we start moving, or in terms of how we modify these contracts, we have two forms. So, and the newest form that I'm going to talk about, which is the subcontractor, is actually somewhat new to the 2017 version. So in the AIA, in those series of documents that we've talked about, under the G series, they have the G701. That is the change order form. Now, it used to be with the AIA that you could check a box in their electronic software and it would become a subcontractor change order. But what they've done in the 2017 version is they've actually created a new form that is called the G701S. S meaning subcontract. And so what they've done is, instead of using the same form for the prime contract and then turning around and just modifying it to the subcontract, they've actually created two separate forms. So we'll be working with both of these forms. I will provide to you guys the form as far as the G701 is concerned, in which you guys will take that information in the next assignment, which I will give you next week, and you will generate the subcontractor change orders, which is the G701S. Okay, so let's talk for a little bit. Feel like I'm missing something in my slides here. Yeah, so we're going to talk about changes in the construction project versus the change order process. So I've got a bunch of definitions we're going to go through here, and then I'm going to talk briefly about what the process is in each of those. So once we're out there as the general contractor, these are essentially the different things that we can, the types of changes that, or types of things that will cause us to change our scope of work, price, or time. In other words, these are the types of things that ultimately may lead to a change order on a project. So let's start with the owner-directed change of scope. This comes off of page 403. In fact, most of these will be on page 403 to 405 of your textbook. So owner-directed change of scope is a change in the scope of the work. A change of scope of work is when the amount of work is changed from that contained in the contract as indicated by the contract documents. So that would be the textbook definition of an owner-directed change of scope. So, okay, so I'm looking at this, and so this is when the owner would actually direct that. And that would be in lieu of like one of the other entities like the architect. A constructive change is the architect or owner representative causes the contractor to perform work outside of the contract. So that's what a constructive change would be. I'm going to come back to this because the AIA does actually use a different terminology. Under the constructive change, we do have what we call a CCD, a constructive change directive. So we will come back to that in just one second. A consequential change, this is another important one. This occurs as a consequence of the owner-directed change of scope of work and constructive change. In other words, let's just say a consequential change would be, we're going to go out there and we're going to make this change where we are going to add an outlet, for example. And let's just say in that situation of adding an outlet, we already had drywall installed. And so in doing that, we actually had to tear out some drywall. Tearing out that drywall would be a consequence of the change of adding an outlet. So that would be an example of what a consequential change would be. Hopefully by now you guys have heard the terms differing site conditions. So this is when different conditions exist than what was represented in the project. Or on the construction documents. So oftentimes when we think about differing site conditions, we think about the physical site, the dirt. And let's just say we're out there, we're digging along, and all of a sudden we run into some type of huge boulders, let's say some granite boulder that we really had no way of anticipating. Okay. That is what's considered a differing site condition in one regard. We can also talk about differing site conditions in terms of, let's say on a remodel, we go in there and let's just say that we had some type, or let's say the owner and the architect had an environmental study completed, and they found that there was no cause for concern for things like asbestos in a building. But now us as a general contractor, we go in there and we start doing work and we uncover work that we determine has asbestos in there. Okay, that would be another way that we could look at a differing site condition. However, if a person could have had, and when we say a person like the contractor, if they could have reasonably determined the differing site conditions, then the claim may not be valid. So let's just say that you're out there, you're digging in the dirt, and all of a sudden you run into that boulder. But the reality is that's a very common occurrence in the area, and it's been documented. Then the courts, in terms of case law, have ruled that based on precedents, that you as a contractor should have been reasonably inclined to determine that that could have existed. So you have to make sure. Another way, going back to my other example on the remodel, oftentimes you could make an argument that, okay, we are going to do this remodel. I can go to the building department. In that building department, I can determine that this building was originally built in, let's say, 1930, and the owners of these buildings during that time, they pulled building permits, and they did a remodel in 1947, and 1958, and 1976. And once you would uncover stuff like that, then it should actually start causing some concern that there would be a potential for differing site conditions, or things like asbestos, or maybe lead paint, or things with mercury, or some of those things that are considered hazardous. So if there is a reasonable expectation, then you don't necessarily have a claim on that. Okay, so let's move on here a little bit. Okay, so I just covered this job discovery of hazardous material. That is a type of differing site condition. Code revisions, that's another one. So this can get a little bit tricky, because in the event that you are required to put work into place that differs than the code required when you bid out the project, then that could potentially cause a person to, or a contractor to, have claim on additional costs. Now, generally what my experience has been is, if a building permit was issued under a certain code, and then the code changed during the course of the construction of the project is required to be built under the previous code, or the code that the building permit was issued under. And so that may not play out. Sometimes in our more current non-traditional delivery, like some of our alternative delivery systems, it is possible that we could go into a guaranteed maximum price contract based on one code, because that's what the code was developed under. But by the time the architect or us or whoever went to the building department for the plan review to get the building permit, they could have had that adoption, and then all of a sudden they've got to go back and make changes, because we have to construct something to the newly adopted code, which has happened since we actually maybe gone into contract. And so that would be probably an example of a situation where a code revision might require a change order. Vendor coordination. Okay, this occurs when the owner of a project is supplying equipment under the separate contract. The contractor ends up coordinating the installation. So where this has actually happened to me is oftentimes when I've had owner supplied material. In the contract, it specifically states that it's owner supplied, but it's the contractor has responsibility of coordinating the installation. I've had that happen. I have had a few projects where the owner is responsible for both getting the contract of supplying or installing something, and then halfway through it, they realize that they don't have the expertise or whatever, and they come back to me as the contractor saying, hey, per the contract, we were supposed to supply and coordinate the installation of this. We don't want to do that anymore. We will supply, and we would like you to take care of all the coordination. Then that would be an example of when you might go through and have a change order for that. I have had that happen on projects. I think what happens is the owners are like, hey, we can do this, we can do this, we can save some money, and then it turns out that they realize that it's a little bit more difficult than what they realized. So product substitutions: when a product that has been specified is no longer available, it must be substituted. If this substitution results as an added cost, then the change order should be submitted. So I've had this happen again on projects where, let's say, some type of a light fixture, going back to that example I used, that it was specified as this fixture. The subcontractor, the electrician, the electrical subcontractor, they went out, they submitted a bid on this. And then sometime between that and when they actually started procuring the stuff, that the manufacturer no longer made that actual fixture. And so they no longer can get that fixture. Well, when that happens, that oftentimes may actually equate into some type of an upcharge for the electrical subcontractor, the newer fixture, or whatever they substitute. The architect decides to substitute with as a different fixture, there's a price difference. So that would be another example of where maybe a product substitution would generate a change order. Okay, let's talk about the change order process. And once we get this will take us pretty much to where we'll start off next week, where I will introduce you to the process of actually generating the subcontractor change orders. Okay, so there's a couple of different ways that we go about the change orders. Okay, and it really just depends on how, conditions on the project and how things are going. So two ways here. There is the architect issues a request for proposal, or they issue a construction change directive. They're two different things here. The contractor becomes okay, and then the other one is the contractor becomes aware of conditions requiring clarification. I'll come back to that. So these are the three different things we're gonna talk about here really quickly. So an RFP, first off, is a request for proposal. Okay, and usually if you get a request for proposal during the course of a project, what's really happening is it's a major change to the project. Okay, and this major change, we'll use an example. Let's say we're building some type of a middle school, and let's just say that in the design that there was let's just say it was designed so in the future you could add a wing to that school. And let's just say in the original bidding process, they did not bid out that wing because they did not, the school district did not have the financial capacity to make that happen. And then all of a sudden, as we're going through the process, let's just say we're gearing up, we're starting work, we're putting in foundation, maybe we're even further in the project. And all of a sudden, let's say the school district gets some type of grant money, or they do some type of levy or bond type thing to raise money, and let's just say all of a sudden they have the money to do that. So they don't want to start this without having some type of solid idea of what this is going to cost. And so at this point, they may actually issue a request for proposal for the contractor to give them a proposal to add that wing. Okay, in that type of situation, what happens is the RFP is developed, it is submitted as a change order proposal. Sometimes it's also known as just a response to the request for proposal. And then the owner and the architect have to make a decision. Okay, if that decision is in the affirmative, that they're going to proceed, then what will happen is a change order, the instrument once again would be prepared, signed by all three parties, the architect, owner, and general contractor. And then at that point, and only after that point, would we begin on the work. Okay, let me jump back up there to the construction change directive, because the construction change directive is a little bit different. I didn't get it in the slideshow, but if you go back to the A201, you can take a look in It should be under Article 7. It will define the construction change directive. The essence of a construction change directive is this: there's not time for us to go through a formal process of generating some type of response to the request for proposal, or submitting that change order proposal for an owner and architect to review, sign off, generate the change order, and then sign off. We have to keep the project going. So construction change directive is basically a written document. It's an instrument, once again, that is given to the general contractor, stating that you are to proceed with this work. And then as you're doing that, you are to be generating, documenting all of the costs, which will be submitted to the architect. And after it's submitted, then the architect would go ahead and generate the change order for everyone to sign off at a later point. But this is an important thing, even as a contractor, that we would want to sign CCD before we started assuming more costs, generating more costs, because we're going to be responsible for that financial stuff unless we have some type of paper that's signed off. So the last thing we're going to talk about is what happens when an RFP is not issued and a CCD is not issued. And basically what happens is the contractor becomes of some type of condition that we need clarification. That clarification results in some type of change in scope, or just physically we have something that we have to add to our scope of work. It has to be done, otherwise the project can't proceed forward, and we believe it's not part of our original scope of work, and we want to make a claim ultimately that it is. And then with that claim, hopefully we'll get a change order. You know, one thing I just remember that I didn't say when we were talking about claims is, under the A201, the general contractor has 21 days to make that claim. So you need to make sure that if you are making claims and stuff, don't procrastinate those. Make sure you get those documented and make those claims. And let me be careful here. You don't have to necessarily make the claim. You need to put the architect and the owner on notice that there will be a claim. It's you don't necessarily have to finalize the dollar amount, but you need to let them know that you will have a claim. Now, if you guys go back when we did our tracking logs, I introduced you to the idea of a potential change order, and we logged those. So that's what those things end up becoming, is we notify our general contractor, our architect and our owner that we have potential change orders coming, or we're going to have a claim. Okay, so basically in this scenario, the contractor becomes aware of conditions requiring clarification or additional scope of work has been discovered that we believe is not in the original scope of work. However, the physical constraints requires that work to be completed. So I always erred on the side of caution. We would always document. We would create a PCO, potential change order. We actually called them a CCI, a CIC, which was a change in condition. There's some different terminology out there. Over the years, I've kind of, at least with my experience with contractors, the potential change order PCO is the term that I've seen gain most speed or most momentum out there. So basically, when we generate these potential change orders, it's simply because we think that we're going to make a claim because we think that we're doing work outside of the original scope of work, and with that, we want to be compensated. So the way that would work is the contractor notifies the architect of the conditions via request for information. So oftentimes we come up with something that's, okay, this isn't working. There's something not right here. We need clarification. We're going to send in that RFI. to get that clarification. Once that clarification comes, then we have to make a decision if that response that we get in terms of the request for information will actually incur additional costs that are outside of the original scope of work. If that's the case, then we will ask for additional money, and we'll document that as potential change. What I was saying earlier also, there's been many times that I've put potential claim orders down or change orders down. I've documented, and because of just the nature of the job, we were going so fast, we just documented it. We thought it was a potential change. And as I got back into my office and I went through the scope of work and I went through all the correspondence and different things, I determined that in fact did exist in our original scope of work, and it is not an additional cost. And then therefore I would just basically make that status as suspended or whatever, but I would not pursue that in terms of a change order. Okay, so the architect gives clarification, and if it does result in some type of a change, then we document that. And then the contractor determines if the clarification, direction, or work put into place should result in a contract adjustment. So that's what I was just talking about. If I determine that it does need to be put in, or that the work put into place was not in the original contract scope of work, then I want a contract adjustment for that. Okay. So we're going to basically take these claims to the architect and say, this is we need a change order for this amount. If a contract adjustment is required, the contractor develops a change order proposal as quickly as possible and submits it for the architect review. Now, I'm going to be honest, and architects are different. I know times change, but when it came to these types of change orders, our change order proposal that went into the architect simply was us actually taking a G701 and line item by line item by line item, identifying, listing all of those PCOs, and then submitting that document to the architect. And then so in other words, our change order proposal was actually the change order. And I'll be honest also, it was really the architect not really trying to get out of work, but we had the information, and it was easier for us to prepare essentially the document for them. And then if they agreed to everything, they would sign, the owner sign, then we would sign, it would all be executed at that point. Okay, so let me that's what I wanted to go over in terms of Chapter 16 is concerned. On Monday, on Tuesday, I will give you guys more information as far as the next assignment, but I will take you through and show you how to prepare change orders, which we'll be doing to our subcontractors. All right, so again, our next assignment will be coming out next, and I will give you guys some more information. I'll do some demo, and we will get through it.